I am Loretta Mae Thompson. I was born in the killing July heat of 1955 on a small, desperate patch of red clay just outside Jackson, Mississippi. This is not a story that begins with joy, but with a gasp for air in a world already pressing down. The sun that day was a furious white disk, a celestial overseer already scorching the earth when my mama's waters broke. She told me later she felt the first pains right after the rooster. A ragged, defiant bird we called Old Scratch crowed for the third time, a sound like a rusty hinge in the heavy, honeysuckle-thick air. Mama was Clara Belle Thompson, a woman whose hands were a landscape unto themselves. They were not just rough, they were a chronicle. The calluses were continents, the cracks deep river valleys etched by cold well water and lye soap. Her palms were harder than the heartwood of the old water oak behind our house, its branches twisted like arteries against the sky. She picked cotton for the white man from the first blush of dawn, when the sky was the color of a fresh bruise, until the purple cloak of dusk settled, heavy with stars and fatigue. She worked until her spine bent into a permanent question mark, a curve that seemed to ask, "Why?" every minute of every day. It was a question her mouth never formed, but her body spoke it eloquently. My daddy was Elijah Thompson, a quiet man who carried his voice low in his chest. He had deep-set eyes the color of wet bark, eyes that saw everything and gave away nothing. But his laugh, his laugh was a rare and precious thing. It didn't start in his throat. It rumbled up from somewhere deep in his belly, a seismic event of joy that shook his shoulders and made his gold-capped tooth flash in the lamplight. You lived for that sound. You hoarded the memory of it for the lean times. He sharecropped the same 40 acres of stubborn, rust-colored earth his grandfather had worked as a slave. The Emancipation Proclamation was just words on yellowing paper in our world. Freedom here was a shape-shifter. It looked like ownership, but tasted like debt. The land had been promised, then stolen back through the paper tricks of men in white linen suits who wielded ledgers like weapons. Our tenure was written in pencil, easily erased. We lived in what folks called a shotgun shack, a name born of brutal practicality. A bullet fired through the flimsy front door would sail straight out the back without touching a wall. It was 2 rooms of resigned poverty, patched together with the bones of a world that had used us up. Scavenged tin that sang in the wind, flattened oil drums hammered into submission, and walls papered with layers of old newspaper glued with flour paste. At night, by the weak light of a kerosene lamp, I would trace the faded headlines. Eisenhower elected. Korean armistice signed. Stories from a planet that spun on a different axis, oblivious to our tiny, struggling satellite. 8 children came in a weary, relentless procession. I was number 4, the forgotten middle, not the eldest, carrying the weight of responsibility, not the baby, swaddled in the last dregs of attention. I was the silent observer, the one who learned the geography of lack by heart. The roof was a constellation of leaks. When the rains came, a slow, persistent plink, plink, plink would begin, and we would perform our familiar ballet, scrambling to place every pot, pan, and chipped bowl we owned beneath the drips. The sound of water hitting the hot surface of the wood stove was a sharp, angry hiss, and the pine floorboards would swell and warp until they groaned underfoot like old men complaining. There was no electricity. Our world was defined by the weak, sooty gasp of kerosene lamps, which left ghostly black smudges on the ceiling, a negative image of the night sky. No running water meant a half-mile walk to the well, the rough hemp rope biting into our small, soft palms, the bucket coming up heavy and cold. No bathroom meant an outhouse 50 yards behind the house, a buzzing cathedral of flies in summer, a windswept chamber of horrors in winter. The seasons were not gentle. Winter wind didn't whisper. It sliced through the cracks in the walls like a blade. We would bury ourselves under mountains of rags, thin quilts, and cast-off coats, our breath frosting the air above our huddled forms. But summer was its own special oppression. The heat didn't just sit. It pressed down like a physical weight, a heavy, sweating hand on your chest. The air grew thick and still, smelling of hot dirt and wilted greens. And through the endless, airless nights, the mosquitoes sang their high, maddening opera in our ears. My first memory is crystalline, a shard of something beautiful lodged in the hard rock of those early years. I must have been 4 or 5, standing barefoot in the cool, powdery dirt of the yard watching Mama hang laundry on the sagging wire line. The sheets were thin as gauze, but they billowed like the sails of ghost ships in the faint breeze. And she was humming. It was a low, worn-out sound, but it was a song. Amazing Grace. Her voice, cracked from disuse and dust, would break on the high notes, but she kept on, her hands moving in a rhythmic, pinning dance. "Mama," I asked, my voice small in the vastness of the yard, "why you always hummin' that one?" She didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on some distant point beyond the cotton fields, beyond the horizon. She pinned a worn pillowcase and said, so softly I almost didn't hear, "It reminds me there's something bigger than all this misery, child. Something that ain't this dirt, ain't this heat, ain't this tired." She said it like a fact, like stating the sun was hot. Then she went back to humming, the sound weaving a fragile thread of hope in the thick air. That was the before time. That was before the bottom fell out of the world, before everything broke open. At 6 years old, childhood ended. They put me in the fields. Mama, her face a mask of resignation, tied a burlap sack around my tiny waist with a piece of coarse twine. It hung down to my ankles, a crude, empty womb waiting to be filled with white gold. She knelt in the dirt, her eyes level with mine, and showed me. Her own fingers, blunt and scarred, moved with a swift, painful grace. "You gotta get the bowl, but not the husk, see? Tear the husk, they dock your weight. And you gotta be quick." Quick as a minnow. My fingers were baby soft, the skin tender and pink. They were not made for the sharp, dried pods of the cotton bowl. By mid-morning, the tips were split open, little red mouths weeping. The blood welled up and stained the pristine white cotton a shocking, fleshy pink. The sight of it, my own blood on the crop, made a sob hitch in my throat. The tears came, hot and silent, cutting trails through the dust on my cheeks. Mama saw me. She shuffled over, her own sack heavy. Without a word, she took the corner of her apron sleeve, spat on it faintly, and wiped my face. The gesture was rough, the fabric abrasive. "Crying don't pick cotton, Loretta," she said, her voice flat, emptied of all comfort. "Tears ain't currency. They don't fill the sack." She turned back to her row, her bent back a lesson in itself. By the second day, I learned. I learned to swallow the sobs, to let the salt water burn a hole in my stomach instead of falling on the ground. I learned to make my small hands into claws, to ignore the stinging splits, to focus on the rhythm, reach, pluck, stuff, step. Reach, pluck, stuff, step. It was a metronome of survival. And always there was Mr. Harlan, the overseer. He rode a dappled gray mare, a fine animal made mean by its rider. He was a long, lean man, all sinew and spite, with a straw hat stained dark by years of sweat. A permanent scowl was carved into his face, as if he'd been weaned on a pickle. His bullwhip was coiled on his saddle, not as a tool, but as a promise. He would ride up and down the rows, his shadow falling over us like a chill. When he saw me, a tiny speck in an ocean of green and white, slowing down, he would rein in his horse. He'd lean down from the saddle, so close I could see the red veins in his eyes and smell the stale tobacco and rot on his breath. "Faster, nigger girl," he'd hiss, the words slithering into my ear. "Or I'll stripe your skinny legs till you dance a proper jig." My heart would become a frantic bird trapped in my chest, its wings beating against my ribs. I'd pick faster, my small hands trembling, stuffing the sack until the burlap scraped my legs raw. Daddy worked the same field, but farther down, a silent, bending figure among the plants. Sometimes, when I straightened up to ease the ache in my back, I'd catch a glimpse of him doing the same. Our eyes would meet for a fleeting second across the sea of cotton. He'd give the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Not a smile, just an acknowledgement. "I see you. I am here too." I saw the tightness in his jaw, the hard set of his mouth when Mr. Harlan rode past him. It was a language of clenched teeth and silent fury. One October evening, near the harvest's end, the air turned sharp and carried the smell of wood smoke. Daddy had kept a careful count in a little blue-lined notebook he carried in the bib pocket of his overalls. His handwriting was neat, precise, numbers of pounds picked, dates, the promised price per hundredweight. He said the math was clear. The white man at the big house, Mr. Calhoun, owed us more than the usual short pay. It was a significant sum, enough maybe for a proper winter coat for Mama, shoes that didn't have holes, a Christmas with a little meat. Mama sensed the danger in the air. She stood at the stove, her hand on his arm. "Elijah, don't," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "It ain't worth the trouble. The trouble always costs more than the money." He looked at her, and for a moment, I saw the man he might have been in a different world, proud, principled. "Clara," he said softly, "a man's word is his word. A man's work is his work. I got to ask for what's ours." He put on his hat and walked out into the gathering dusk, the notebook a square outline against his chest. He came back quiet, not defeated but burning. His eyes held a low, hot light like coals in a banked fire. He didn't say much at supper, just pushed his beans around his plate. The air in the shack was thick with unspoken dread. Then, after dark, we heard them. First, a low growling in the distance like approaching thunder. Then louder, the raw, tearing sound of truck engines. Headlights, brutal and unforgiving, cut across the yard, slicing through the cracks in our walls, turning our home into a cage of moving light and stark shadow. Men poured from the trucks. They were shapes of pure nightmare, clad in white robes and pointed hoods that erased their humanity. They didn't knock. They kicked in the front door, a sound of splintering finality that echoed in my bones. Wood flew. Mama screamed, a raw animal sound. Daddy stood up slowly, like a man rising from prayer. He didn't raise his hands. He just stood there, a quiet monument in the chaos. They swarmed him, dragging him out into the dirt. One man, bigger than the others, swung a thick wooden club. I heard the sickening, wet thud as it connected with Daddy's back. He crumpled to his knees with a grunt. Mama ran out after him, her arms outstretched. One of the robed figures shoved her down hard. Her head hit the ground with a nauseating crack, and she lay still. I was frozen at the window, my brothers and sisters clinging to me, a knot of terrified limbs. My littlest sister, Ruth, pulled me away. We scrambled under the big iron bedstead, deep into the dust and shadows. She clamped her small, strong hand over my mouth, her own tears wet against my neck. "Hush, Letty," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Hush now." From our hiding place, we heard the sounds. Grunts, the scuffle of feet in gravel, a muffled curse. Then the truck doors slamming, engines revving, tires spinning and flinging gravel against the side of the shack. Then silence. A silence so profound it had a weight, a taste, coppery like blood. We waited all night. Mama came to, crawling back inside, a dark trickle of blood tracing a path from her hairline to her chin. She didn't speak. She just sat by the shattered door, rocking back and forth, whispering the same two words over and over like a broken psalm. "Please, Lord. Please, Lord." Morning came gray and cold, a washed-out, indifferent light. We walked the dirt road, calling his name, our voices small and lost in the vastness of the fields. "Daddy, Elijah!" The only answer was the caw of a crow. A neighbor boy, fishing for crawdads, found him first. He came running to us, his eyes wide with a horror too big for his young face. Daddy was in the shallow, sluggish part of the creek that fed into the Tallahatchie River. He was floating face down, his overalls bloated with water. His body was swollen, distorted, a thing apart from the man he was. His face was unrecognizable, a mask of violence. We knew him only by the old, silvery scar on his left forearm, a souvenir from a sawmill blade years before, a story he'd told with a laugh. Mama's wail, when she saw him, is a sound I have never escaped. It was not a human sound. It was the earth cracking open, the sound of a soul being torn in two. She fell to her knees in the cold mud, clawing at the earth, that terrible sound pouring out of her until she had no voice left. We buried him the next day in the colored section of Oak Grove Cemetery, a plot of weedy, forgotten land behind a rusty fence. No proper preacher came, just old Deacon Miller from our church, who read the 23rd Psalm in a hurried, fearful mumble, his eyes darting toward the road. We marked the grave with 2 sticks lashed together into a cross and wrapped with twine. It looked like something a child would make. It rotted away before the next winter, as if the very earth was ashamed to hold him. After the funeral, Mama stopped being the Mama I knew. The humming ceased. The light in her eyes, already dim, was snuffed out completely. She moved through the days like a ghost, her motions slow and mechanical. She found a half-full jar of corn liquor someone had left under the sink, and she drank it in one long, shuddering pull. It became her medicine, her religion, her escape. At first, it was just in the evenings, a way to slide into unconsciousness. Then it was in the mornings to face the day. Then it was all day, a constant, low-grade fog. The jar was replaced by bottles, traded for or bought with what little money we scraped together. And the men started coming. Not neighbors, not friends. Strangers mostly, with hard eyes and smells of tobacco, cheap whiskey, and unwashed sweat. They would show up at dusk, talk low with Mama on the porch, and stay late. I heard the sounds through the thin wall, the murmur of voices, the creak of the bed springs, a laugh that was never kind. I would pull the thin pillow over my head, trying to drown it out, trying to disappear. I was 9 years old when I effectively became the woman of the house. I woke in the pre-dawn blackness, my body aching with a fatigue that was too old for my years. I'd build the fire in the stove, blowing on the embers until they caught. I'd boil grits in water, fry a piece of fatback if we had it, its salty smell the closest thing to luxury we knew. I changed diapers on the bobbies, washing them in the tin tub with lye soap that burned my hands and made them cry. I'd walk the older ones to the dirt road, making sure they started the long trek to school. Then I'd come back, sweep the dirt floor, mend clothes with clumsy stitches, pick whatever sorry vegetables our neglected garden still gave, and try to hold the crumbling pieces of our lives together. School was a one-room building 5 miles away, a shack painted a weary white that was peeling like sunburnt skin. We walked it every day, rain or shine, carrying our lunch in a lard bucket, if there was lunch. Sometimes it was just a cold biscuit, sometimes nothing at all. The white children passed us in their big, sunny yellow buses, kicking up clouds of red dust that coated our legs. They would press their faces to the windows, pointing and laughing, their mouths open in silent taunts behind the glass. We kept our eyes on the road, our shoulders squared against the humiliation. Our teacher, Miss Evelyn Porter, was a thin, brown-skinned woman with a fierce intelligence behind her wire-rimmed glasses. She taught all 8 grades at once, a one-woman academy of desperation and hope. She would switch from teaching ABCs to the littlest ones, to diagramming sentences for the older ones, to explaining the war between the states from a book that called it The Late Unpleasantness. The books were ancient, cast-offs from the white school, pages yellowed and brittle, covers falling off. They told stories of George Washington's cherry tree and Abraham Lincoln's log cabin, a parade of noble, pale-faced heroes. I remember staring at the pictures, a quiet question forming inside me. Why don't any of the stories have people who look like us? Where are we in this history? Miss Evelyn saw that question in my eyes. One day after school, as I helped her clean the blackboard, she said, "Loretta, education is the key. It's the one thing they can't take from you once you got it in your head. It's the key to a different kind of life." She said it with such conviction, such fire, that I believed her. I clutched that key in my heart, even when it felt too heavy to carry. When I was 10, Uncle Rufus came to live with us. Mama's brother, he said he'd lost his job up in Memphis. He was a big man with a loose, rolling walk and eyes that never quite met yours. He smelled of stale whiskey, unwashed clothes, and a kind of simmering anger. He slept on a pallet in the corner of the main room, his scarred leather boots by the door. Nights were the worst. After Mama drank herself into a stupor, the house would fall into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the snores of my siblings. I started hearing the floorboards creak after midnight. I'd lie rigid in the bed I shared with 2 of my sisters, listening. I'd hear him moving around, packing, sometimes muttering to himself. Then came the night. I felt the edge of my mattress dip under a heavy weight. His breath, hot and sour, washed over my neck and cheek. A rough, calloused hand slid under my thin nightgown, groping, searching. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked solid with a terror so profound it was soundless. For one terrible second, I was paralyzed. Then an instinct deeper than fear took over. I kicked backward with all my strength, my bare heel connecting solidly with his chest. He let out a grunt of surprise and pain, cursing low and mean. I had already started keeping the big kitchen knife, the one with the chipped bone handle Daddy used to use, under my pillow. I'd heard older girls whispering about men who took what they wanted, and a cold, hard resolve had settled in me. My fingers closed around the familiar handle. As he recovered, looming over me in the dark, I sat up. The moonlight through the window caught the blade as I pressed the cold, sharp steel against the soft flesh of his throat. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was low, flat, and absolutely steady. I whispered, each word a chip of ice. "If you ever touch me again, if you even look at me wrong, I will cut you from ear to ear. Like Daddy taught me to butcher hogs. Clean and quick, you understand me." He stared at me, his eyes wide, white circles in the gloom. He saw something in my face, not the fear of a child, but the lethal calm of a cornered animal. He believed me. He slowly raised his hands and backed away from the bed, from me. He was gone before sunrise, taking his boots and his stink with him. Mama woke up mean as a snake, her head pounding. "Where? Rufus gone off to?" she slurred. "He left," I said, staring straight at her as I stirred the grits. She looked at me hard, her eyes bloodshot and suspicious. "What did you do, girl? To run him off? He was family, he might have helped." "I didn't do nothing," I said, my voice still flat. "He just left." She must have seen the truth, or a shadow of it in my unblinking gaze. A rage, misplaced and desperate, flashed across her face. She crossed the room in 2 strides and slapped me, hard across the face. The sound was a sharp crack in the quiet room. My head snapped to the side, and I felt the warm trickle of blood where my teeth cut the inside of my lip. I didn't cry, I didn't flinch. I slowly turned my head back to look at her, tasting the iron tang of my own blood. I just stared. I didn't see my mama anymore. I saw a broken vessel, a warning. That was the day. The day the last soft thing inside me hardened into flint. The day I knew I could not save her, and I could not let this place claim me. I stayed another year out of duty to the little ones, but inside I was already gone. I was just waiting for my body to catch up with my spirit. At 12, I made my decision. I took a flour sack and packed 2 faded cotton dresses, a broken comb, a precious bar of lavender-scented soap I'd saved, and the kitchen knife wrapped in a rag. I told my oldest sister, Geneva, who was 14 and trying to be mama herself. "I'm going, Neva. I'm going to find something better." She cried, silent tears cutting through the dust on her cheeks. She begged me to stay. "It's dangerous out there, Letty. You're just a baby." I hugged her tight, feeling her thin shoulders shake. "I'll send for y'all," I whispered, a promise I intended to keep even if I didn't know how. "When I can, I promise." I walked to the highway, a narrow strip of asphalt that seemed to stretch to infinity. I stuck out my thumb, my small face set in what I hoped looked like determination, not desperation. It was hours before a truck, driven by a weary-looking colored man, slowed and stopped. He peered down at me. "Where you headed, little bit?" "Away," I said. He sighed, a long, world-weary sound. "Get in. I'm going as far as Atlanta." He let me ride in the cab, a miracle of kindness. He gave me half his biscuit wrapped in wax paper and a swallow of warm water from his canteen. We didn't talk much. He just drove, his eyes on the unspooling road. As we neared the city, its skyline a jagged promise on the horizon, he finally spoke. "Stay smart, little sister. The world ain't kind to girls like you. Keep your wits and keep that knife close." He let me off on the outskirts, and I watched his taillights disappear, alone for the first time in a world of concrete and noise. Atlanta was a beast. It roared and stank and moved too fast. For the first 2 weeks, I was a ghost in its underbelly. I slept in the hard plastic chairs of the Greyhound bus station, chased away by security only to creep back later. I learned which cafes on Decatur Street threw out day-old bread in the alleys after closing. I learned which dumpsters behind the fruit market sometimes had edible, if bruised, scraps. I washed up in the cold, chlorinated water of public fountains, trying to scrub the smell of street off my skin. I learned to walk with purpose, to look like I belonged somewhere, so the police wouldn't stop me, so men wouldn't see an easy target. After 2 weeks of near starvation, I found a job. Mabel's Diner on Auburn Avenue was a greasy spoon with cracked linoleum and the perpetual smell of fried onions. Mr. Goldstein, the owner, was a short, bald Jewish man with thick glasses that magnified his tired eyes. He looked me up and down. "You strong? You can wash dishes." "Yes, sir." He hired me on the spot. 50 cents an hour, cash, plus 1 meal per shift. It felt like a fortune. The work was endless. Towers of greasy plates, pots crusted with burnt food, silverware that never gleamed no matter how hard I scrubbed. The soap water turned my hands red and raw, the skin peeling back from my nails. Mr. Goldstein watched me. At first, I thought it was just a boss making sure I worked, but his eyes lingered. He'd come behind me as I bent over the deep sink, his belly brushing against my back. "Good girl," he'd say, his voice oily. "You're a hard worker, sweet thing." He'd pinch my bottom, a quick, sharp pain. The shame would flood me hot and nauseating, but I needed the money, I needed the meal. So I swallowed the shame, kept my head down, and scrubbed harder, the rhythmic scrape of the brush against metal drowning out my thoughts. One afternoon, the diner was quiet. He called me to the back storeroom, a cramped space smelling of pickles and rat poison. "Need you to count the canned goods, sweet thing." I went in, uneasy. He followed, closing the door behind him, blocking the only exit. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in. "You're a pretty little thing," he breathed, his onion-laden breath hot on my face. He tried to pull me close. Panic, sharp and electric, shot through me, but it wasn't the frozen panic of the night with Rufus. This was a different kind. My eyes darted. On a hot plate in the corner sat a large metal pot, still half full of near-boiling water used for sterilizing utensils. I didn't think. I wrenched my arm free, grabbed the pot's handle with both hands, and threw the scalding water at him. It splashed across his chest and stomach, soaking through his shirt. He screamed, a high, piercing shriek of pure agony like a stuck pig. He stumbled back, clawing at his shirt. I didn't wait. I yanked the door open and ran. I ran out the back door, down the alley, and didn't stop running until my lungs were fire and my legs were jelly. I never looked back. I never collected the wages he owed me. I was back on the street, the brief respite of the diner over, replaced by the familiar, gnawing hunger. For weeks, I was a shadow again. I begged for change on corners, learning the subtle geography of pity and contempt, which white ladies in gloves might drop a dime without touching your hand, which men would curl their lip and spit near your feet. I grew so thin my collarbones stood out like handles, my ribs a washboard under my dress. Then at 15, I met Jamal Hawkins. He was beautiful in a dangerous way. Tall, with skin the color of polished mahogany, he worked loading freight at the rail yard. He had a gold front tooth that flashed when he smiled, which was often, and a laugh that was deep and easy. He saw me shivering on a corner one chilly evening. "Little bit, you look like you could use a hot meal," he said, not unkindly. He bought me a plate of fried catfish and collard greens at a noisy, steamy cafe. I ate like I was starving, which I was. He watched me, smiling. He talked about a future. He had a room, he said, a real room with a door that locked. He said we could make a life. He said I was too pretty to be on the street. I was so tired, so lonely, so scared of the coming winter. His words painted a picture of warmth, safety, belonging. It was a mirage, but I was dying of thirst. I said yes. We stood in front of a justice of the peace, a bored-looking man in a small, dusty office. Two strangers from the hallway signed as witnesses. Jamal carried me over the threshold of the tiny rented room, laughing like in the movies. For the first few months, it was almost sweet. He brought home his pay. I kept the room clean, cooked his favorite foods, neck bones and rice, candied yams. We laughed. He was gentle when he made love to me, calling me his little wife. I let myself believe the picture. Then the bottle appeared, just a little whiskey after work to unwind. Then the bottle was bigger. Then the arguments started small at first over nothing. The first hit came over a pot of rice. I'd let it cook too long, the bottom scorching. He slapped me, an open-handed blow that caught me on the side of the head. My ear rang for 3 days, a high-pitched whine that drowned out my thoughts. I made excuses. I deserved it. I should have paid better attention. A good wife doesn't burn the rice. The next time was because supper was late. He'd had a bad day at the yard. He punched me in the shoulder, leaving a bruise the color and size of a ripe plum. Then it was my arm, twisted behind my back, then a kick to my ribs when I was on the floor. I learned the rules of this new, intimate war. I learned to duck, to flinch before the blow landed. I learned to apologize quickly, abjectly, for things that weren't my fault. I learned to make myself small, to be quiet, to be invisible. I learned that the man with the gold-toothed smile and the easy laugh lived right beside the monster, and the monster was always closer to the surface. Pregnancy came fast. The first one in 1971 was a secret hope I clutched to my chest. Maybe a baby would soften him. Maybe it would anchor us to something good. I carried high and felt every flutter, every kick. In my heart, I named him Elijah. Labor started at home. We had no money for a hospital. A kind, weary neighbor lady, Miss Janey, came and helped. He came too soon, tiny, with skin like wrinkled silk and lips that were a faint, worrying blue. He breathed in little gasps, a faint, bird-like sound. I held him, wrapped in a clean towel, rocking, whispering, praying. He lived for 2 hours in my arms, then went still, the brief, fragile connection severed. Jamal drank through the makeshift funeral, leaning against the wall of our room, his eyes glazed. I buried our first son, wrapped in my only good blouse in a pauper's field. I did it alone. Sarah came in 1972, small but fierce. She entered the world screaming, her tiny fist clenched, grabbing my finger with a strength that surprised me. Marcus followed in 1974, a big baby with big lungs and a big appetite, the very image of his father. The North was calling. Stories filtered down like gospel. Detroit, jobs. The auto plants were hearing, good money, the promised land. We scraped together every cent, sold our pitiful collection of things, and boarded a northbound Greyhound in January 1975. We arrived to a world turned inside out. Snow. I had never seen so much snow. It fell in silent, relentless waves, covering the grime and the promise alike. We found an apartment on Detroit's east side. It was infested with roaches that skittered boldly across the floor in broad daylight. The rent was astronomical, the heat sporadic, sighing on and off like a dying man's breath. Jamal got on at Chrysler, the swing shift. For 8 months, there was a tense, hopeful peace. Real money came in. I bought the children winter coats. Then the layoffs came, rumors, then pink slips. The line was last hired, first fired. The bottle returned, bigger and meaner than ever. He stayed out nights, came home smelling of other women and rage. I had to work. I started cleaning houses in Grosse Pointe, a world so foreign it felt like another country. Manicured lawns like green carpets, houses so big they had names, cars that purred in driveways. I took 2 buses each way, 4 hours of travel for 6 hours of work. They paid $5 a day, sometimes 4 if they felt the pinch. They never called me Loretta. I was girl. They left notes on the kitchen counter. Please do not use the family toilet. Use the powder room in the basement. Do not sit on the furniture. Do not eat any food. Sandwiches are in the fridge for you. One woman, Mrs. Evelyn Cunningham, hired me 3 days a week. She had a voice like clinking ice and pearl earrings she'd leave carelessly on her dressing table. One day, after I'd cleaned her room, the earrings were gone. The next morning, she was waiting for me, her face tight with fury. My pearls are missing, the ones from my husband. They were right here. I didn't touch them, ma'am, I said, my stomach sinking. She called the police. 2 white officers arrived, their presence filling the pristine kitchen with a new kind of menace. They made me empty my purse, my coat pockets. They made me take off my shoes. They found nothing but a bus pass and a stick of gum. It didn't matter. We're taking you downtown, girl, one said, his hand tight on my arm. At the station, they didn't book me. They took me to a back room. One shoved me face first against a cold cinder block wall. The other used his baton, not with wild swings, but with precise, brutal jabs to the backs of my thighs. The pain was blinding, a white-hot explosion that stole my breath. Nigger bitch, he grunted with each strike. Better not show your face in Grosse Pointe again. I limped home, each step agony. By nightfall, the bruises had bloomed, vast and purple, a grotesque map of contempt on my skin. Jamal saw them, said nothing, and went out for a bottle. He left for good in 1978, moved in with a barmaid named Tanya. He just stopped coming home. The relief was a quiet, shameful thing, buried under the sheer terror of being alone with 2 small children. The welfare check became our lifeline, a meager monthly tide of survival. Food stamps bought pinto beans, cornmeal, margarine, day-old bread. We ate the same things in a rotating, bland procession. Many nights, Sarah and Marcus went to bed with bellies still rumbling. I would tell them stories, not fairy tales, but stories of a farm with a big garden, of a mama who hummed, of a daddy with a rumbling laugh. I painted pictures with my words to distract them from the hollow feeling inside. Then Sarah got sick. It was 1980, a bad fever that spiked suddenly, a stiff neck, a pounding headache. The doctor at the free clinic said it was polio, which was a ghost from the past, a disease of dirt floors and contaminated water. Our old building had ancient, lead-lined pipes. She survived, thank God, but the virus left its mark. Her left leg withered, thinner and weaker than the right. She needed a heavy, clanking metal brace to walk. She hated it. She'd come home from school in tears, the echoes of other children's taunts. Cripple, iron leg, still ringing in her ears. Marcus was different. Bright, quick, he devoured comic books about heroes with secret powers. He loved school at first, bringing home gold stars on his papers. But by 12, the streets of the Brewster projects exerted a stronger pull. The older boys had money in their pockets, flashy clothes, a swagger that spoke of power in a world that gave them none. I begged him. "Marcus, baby, stay home, read your books, that's your way out." He'd look at me with Jamal's eyes, but softer. "Mama, we need money. I can make it fast, I can help you." He wanted to be the man of the house. It was a poisoned chalice. He didn't come home one night in February 1990. He was 16. The police knocked at 3 a.m., their hats in their hands, their faces professionally blank. A drive-by on Beaubien Street. A spray of bullets from a passing car. One bullet, they said, entered just under his chin and exited through the top of his skull. Death was instantaneous. I had to go down to the cold, tiled room to identify him. They pulled back the sheet. It was my boy, and yet it was. The violence had changed the landscape of his face. I found him by the small, strawberry-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder, the one I'd kissed 1,000 times. I nodded, a single, jerky movement. The sound that came from me was not a wail, but a dry, tearing rasp, as if my grief had worn out its own voice. I buried him next to the tiny, unmarked spot where I imagined Elijah lay. The plot was near the freeway. The constant, rushing roar of traffic became the soundtrack to my visits. After Marcus, something broke and something was forged. The quiet, enduring sorrow turned into a directed fire. I started marching. If my voice couldn't save my son, maybe it could join others to save someone else. I marched when crack cocaine flooded our streets like a poisonous river, stealing the minds and souls of friends, sons, and daughters. I marched when President Reagan's budget axes fell, severing the already thin lifelines of welfare, food stamps, job programs, the very things keeping my community from total collapse. We marched in the streets of Detroit, our voices hoarse, chanting, "No justice, no peace." The words were a spell, a prayer, a weapon. In 1985, I went back south for the 20th anniversary of the Selma marches. Standing on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the Alabama sun beating down, I felt the ghosts of John Lewis and Hosea Williams walking beside me. When the police line advanced, when the tear gas canisters arced through the air, the burning in my lungs felt familiar. It was the same burn as the cotton fields, the same choke as Jamal's threats. When a club cracked against my shoulder, the pain was sharp, but it was an honest pain. It was a pain with a name and a face, not the silent, creeping agony of despair. I stood anyway. I kept walking. Each step was for Daddy, for Marcus, for me. Life continued its relentless attrition. I lost the apartment in the winter of '86, an eviction notice nailed to the door. We lived in the old, rusted Chevy station wagon for 3 months. I'd park at different churches during the day, hopping for the appearance of sanctuary. The kids slept in the back seat. I slept upright in the front, my neck developing a permanent kink. I got a factory job at Fisher Body, the swing shift. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., the assembly line was a river of metal, an endless, deafening parade of car frames. My job was to attach a small bracket, over and over, thousands of times a night. The metal edges were sharp, and my gloves were thin. My hands were soon a network of cuts and nicks. The foreman, Kowalski, a big-bellied Polish man with a permanent sneer, would stride down the line. If our output slowed, he'd yell, "Move it, you lazy black bitches. This ain't a goddamn picnic." The words were just another kind of noise, drowned out by the machinery. Then a supervisor, a younger man with slicked back hair, cornered me in the locker room one night. He pressed me against the cold metal lockers, his body heavy against mine, his hand groping between my legs. "Be nice," he whispered. "I can make your life easier." I reported it to the union steward, a weary black man who listened, nodded, and said he'd look into it. The next week, I was laid off. Cause poor performance. There was no appeal, no unemployment. I was back to square one, but square one was now a deeper hole. I was 35 when I found the lump. In the shower, my soapy hand slid over a hard, unyielding knot in my left breast, as big and dense as a walnut. The free clinic doctor confirmed it with a grim face. Cancer. It needed surgery. I had no insurance. The charity hospital took it. A radical mastectomy. They removed my breast, the tissue, some muscle, a piece of me that had nourished my children. They did no reconstruction. The scar they left was thick, raised, and ropey, a purple-pink trench across my chest. It was a badge of survival, but it felt like a mutilation. Then came radiation. They painted my skin with purple ink marks and aimed their machines. The burns came first, red, angry, blistering. Then the skin peeled away in great, painful sheets, leaving raw, weeping flesh beneath. Then chemotherapy. They pumped poison into my veins to kill what might be left. It killed everything else first. My hair fell out in clumps on the pillow. I vomited until I was empty, then vomited bile. Diarrhea was constant, a humiliating, exhausting plague. The weakness was the worst. A fatigue so deep it felt like my bones had turned to sand. I would lie on the couch for days, unable to stand, watching dust motes dance in a sunbeam, wondering if this was how it ended. Sarah was 17. She dropped out of high school to nurse me. She cooked broth, held my head when I retched over a bucket, cleaned me, changed my sheets. She was my anchor. Her young face, etched with a worry too old for her years, was what I fought for. I survived, barely. My hair grew back, thin and streaked with premature gray. But a new, cold companion moved in, fear, the fear of it returning. I checked my remaining breast obsessively. Every ache, every pain was a potential herald of doom. I was a prisoner in my own body, waiting for the next betrayal. It almost came in 1992. A blood draw at the hospital, a harried nurse, a needle I saw her use on the patient before me. When I got tested, the wait for the HIV result was its own form of torture. Every night's sweat, every slight cough was examined under the microscope of terror. The negative result brought no relief, only a temporary stay of execution. The fear had taken root. In 1993, the apartment we rented burned down. A neighbor's kids playing with lighter fluid. We lost everything. Every photo of my children as Bobbies, the few letters Mama had written before she died, her old Bible, all gone, turned to ash and melted memory. We moved to a single-room efficiency, bars on the windows, roaches so bold they'd crawl over your hand as you slept. In 1994, something in me shifted again. The fight-or-flight response had been my constant companion, but flight was no longer an option. There was nowhere to run, so I chose to fight, not just for myself, but for others. I started organizing. I went door to door in my building in the projects, not with leaflets, but with a listening ear. I talked to women, black women, brown women, white women living in the same poverty. We were all tired, scared, bearing bruises seen and unseen. I started a support group. We met in the musty basement of Mount Zion Baptist Church on folding chairs under fluorescent lights. We called it Sister's Keeper. At first, we just talked. We shared stories of men who hit, of bosses who grabbed, of a system that ignored us. Then we started planning. I taught them what I'd learned the hard way: always have an escape plan. Pack a go bag with important papers, a change of clothes, hidden money. Agree on a safety word with your kids. I showed them self-defense holds, not to win a fight, but to create a second to run. We practiced on each other, our laughter nervous but real. I helped Tanya in 1996. Her husband had broken her jaw twice. She had 3 kids under 5. I hid them in my single room for 6 weeks. We shared my bed, ate beans and rice, told stories to the children. He came banging on my door one night, drunk and raging. I didn't call the police. I knew what they would or wouldn't do. I picked up the old Louisville Slugger I kept by the door. I opened it just wide enough for him to see me, see the bat, see my eyes. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, my gaze flat and cold as the blade of the knife I once held. I let him see the absolute, unshakable certainty that if he took one step toward that door, I would swing to kill. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills for a full minute. The rage in his eyes slowly curdled into confusion, then fear. He backed away, cursing, stumbling down the hall. He never came back. Tanya got a restraining order, found a job, got her own place. It was a small victory, but it was a stone in the foundation. The losses continued around me. Friends fell to the new plagues, AIDS, crack, heroin overdoses, the ever-present gunshots. I buried them. The caskets seemed to get thinner, cheaper with each funeral. The grief became a familiar layer, like the soot from the old kerosene lamps. And I never stopped marching. My body accumulated its own protest signs. Bad knees, diabetes diagnosed in 98 pills, I sometimes had to ration against the rent. High blood pressure. A retina damaged from the diabetes that stole the sight in my right eye in 2005, then blurred the left. I learned Braille at 58, my fingertips, now calloused and stiff, slowly learning to decipher the raised dots, a new language of resilience. I marched for Rodney King in 91, screaming when the verdict came down not guilty, feeling the city of Detroit itself tremble with the same fury as LA. I marched for Amadou Diallo in 99, 41 shots for a wallet. I marched for Trayvon Martin in 2012, a boy in a hoodie, and I saw my Marcus in every headline. I marched for Michael Brown in Ferguson in 2014, and the smell of tear gas and burning rubber was the smell of a country refusing to heal. I marched for George Floyd in Minneapolis in 2020. I was 65. My knees were shot, my breath short. But when I saw that video, a man's life pressed out of him under a knee, I heard Daddy's grunt, I saw Marcus's still face. I got on a bus with a group of young activists. They called me Mama Loretta. They brought me a folding chair for when I needed to rest. I chanted until my voice was gone. I can't breathe. The words were his, and they were mine, and they were every one of ours. Each march was a cocktail of rage, hope, anger, and bottomless grief, mixed in my heart and poured out into the streets. Now it is January 2026. I am 70 years old. This small, tidy room is my kingdom. It smells of wintergreen oil for my aches and instant coffee, a smell of simple, solitary comfort. My body is an archive of pain, a living museum of American history. Bones that creak like those old floorboards, lungs that wheeze with the memory of tear gas and cotton dust, a map of scars seen and unseen. Yet, I wake every morning. The first light finds the cracks in the blinds. I make this bed with military precision, smoothing the sheets until not a wrinkle remains, a small act of order in a chaotic life. I pray. Even when the answers are silent, the act of sending the words out into the universe feels like a defiance of the void. My grandchildren come now, Sarah's children and theirs. They bring me soup, fix my leaky faucet, read the newspaper to me. They are my eyes, my hands reaching into the future. And I tell them everything. I tell them of the red clay and the humming. I tell them of the man on the gray horse and the night of the motors. I tell them of the knife under the pillow and the pot of boiling water. I tell them of the fists, the graves, the cancer, the marches. I tell them that America is a promise written on a check that has always come back stamped insufficient funds. I tell them that Black women have carried this nation on their backs since before it was a nation and have been blamed time and again for the weight. I tell them to fight, but to fight smart. To love, but to love with their eyes wide open. To never bow and never, ever let themselves be broken completely. My life has been a long, brutal poem written in the minor key of loss. It has been miserable. It has been hard. It has been cruel beyond telling. It is a ledger of graves, Daddy, Elijah, Marcus, Mama, friends too numerous to count. I lived it, I fought it, I survived it, I bore witness to it. I am Loretta Mae Thompson. I am broken, bent, and bone-weary. But I am breathing. I am speaking. I am, against all odds in history, unbowed. And God willing, I am not finished yet.